Welcome to the Expat Empire Podcast, the podcast where you can hear from expats around the world and learn how you can join them. Hey guys, before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that we're offering free 30-minute consulting calls to anyone interested in moving abroad. Whether you're thinking about retiring somewhere warm, starting the next chapter of your international career, or even becoming a digital nomad, we're ready to help you think through the next steps in your journey. Send us a message at expatempire.com and schedule a call today. With that said, let's start the conversation. Hey Jess, thanks so much for joining us today on the Expat Empire Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background to start us off. So where you're originally from, where around the world you've lived so far, I know that's a lot of places, and where you live right now.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'll give you the super abridged version so we can also talk about something else. I am originally from the suburbs of Chicago, and I lived there until college, and then I left. And when I was in college, I had to do a study abroad semester. I chose Costa Rica, and I loved it. So I lived in Costa Rica for that semester, and I thought I can't just like go back and pretend like this never happened. So I told my parents that I was going to take a semester off, which I don't think anyone was happy about or expecting because I was quite like a school person and I really, enjoyed that part of it. So it was just a surprise. And I stayed for that semester, life-changing time because I wasn't in school, but I was volunteering teaching English. And during that time, I had a Spanish teacher. I was taking Spanish and he was Guatemalan. He said, go to Guatemala for Holy Week, Semana Santa. You can't miss it if you're going to be here for that, if you're going to be in Central America. So I went to Antigua, Guatemala, blew my mind that a place like that existed. So I went back, graduated, immediately moved to Guatemala as soon as I could. And then I lived in Guatemala for 2 years, Germany for 3 years, the UK for 4 years. Then I traveled full-time for 4 years. And then through a very long series of events, ended up back in Chicago. And now I actually live in New Jersey where I relocated because of the pandemic, but I was in Brooklyn for 5 years.
Okay, amazing. So much for us to dive into there.
Yeah, there's a
Good
lot
stuff.
there.
Awesome. Let's hear a little bit about maybe where your interest in going abroad originally came from. So it sounds like that first big experience was in Costa Rica for a study abroad, but where did that idea come in your head and how did the people around you think about it as well in terms of just, Costa Rica, are you sure? Or maybe just going abroad in general? Was that something that was in your family or something that you saw around you growing up?
No, and I don't know where I got this from. My family is from the Midwest, hasn't really left the Midwest. My mom grew up in Chicago, moved to the suburbs, and she travels a lot now. But I actually think she caught the bug from me. So I don't know where I come from. I also speak German and Spanish fluently, and definitely nobody in my family does that. So I didn't have any influence there. No. So when I was a junior in high school, I got pretty good grades in high school, much better in college. But I was getting a C in Spanish and I just could not get a C. That was below what I could handle. And I asked my teacher, how can I possibly get an A? I just said an A. She said, it's impossible. You can't get an A. I said, what if I ace every test from here on out? She said, it's impossible. The only way you can get an A is if you ace every test, do all your homework, and you host a Costa Rican. For the exchange program. So I was like, Mom, can I host a Costa Rican? And she surprisingly was like, yeah. So that was really cool. So Fabio came and stayed with us, which was really fun. Blew my mind. I had never met someone so different before. I mean, just so different to who I was, and also just so nice. And all of them from the group were so nice. And so I think that's why my mom was actually okay with Costa Rica because, she may not have known anything about Costa Rica before, but knowing all these boys that came and they were just these wonderful beings that were not like American boys, stupid and burping and whatever American boys do, they were just so polite and respectful and wonderful. So I think she didn't have a problem with me going at all. But it was when he came that I had to use a language for real to say things I wanted to say versus conjugating verbs out loud from a book. And that blew my mind. I was like, oh, this is the point. You can miss that point easily if you don't understand that it's like to make jokes and connect and have fun. And so I realized I was like really good at it. And so that's why when I went to college, I had no idea what to do with my life and how can we be expected to at 18. But I
I
knew I was
know,
really
right?
good at Spanish, and I knew I could be a Spanish teacher. So that's what I studied to be a Spanish teacher. That's what my bachelor's is in, and it was mandatory as part of the program. You had to go to a Spanish speaking
Mhm.
country. So that's how I went abroad.
Wow.
And
Okay.
at the end of the day, people were okay with it. My mom was. I think she was fine with it.
Mhm. So, do you look back at to, I believe, that high school teacher that gave you that ultimatum to get your A grade as kind of the gateway into this career and this life and everything that's come from that? Or do you, I mean, of course, you can't give one person all the credit, but it sounds like that ended up playing a big role ultimately.
I didn't really think about that, but yeah, I definitely think her, but also there was a teacher in the department that was also my friend's mom, and she was a part of the whole exchange program, Mrs. Carp. And I see her because she also came, so we completed the exchange. I did go to Costa Rica for 3 weeks in high school as well. And that like, you know, blew my mind. Um, and so, she was a real because she spoke Spanish. I'd never met like a grown up that spoke Spanish even. That's how sheltered I was.
Hmm.
So,
Right.
that was really fun and interesting. I was like, "Oh, she's a teacher. She speaks Spanish. This is cool." And so I think Mrs. Carp probably had a lot to do with it. I've never ever talked about her before.
Well, it's good to give some people, yeah, a little shout
Yeah.
out, especially so many years later, right? So, then, as you mentioned, that being part of your university education and requirement for your degree, how did you decide on Costa Rica as opposed to any other Spanish speaking country? Was there something that was interesting to you, or just the opportunity that was available to you at the time?
That's interesting. I felt like what my choices were basically, I think there were 3 programs: Mexico, Costa Rica, and Spain. For some reason, I had no interest in Spain. I don't know what
Mm.
it was. Maybe it was the other kids in my group that went to Spain and I was like not interested in them. I'm not sure. And I had already been to Mexico technically on a vacation and I liked it, but
Mhm.
I had also been to Costa Rica. And also because, I had this connection with Fabio and all the others that I just really wanted to go back, I think.
Right. Did you get a chance to meet any of them when you went back, or did you still have those connections with them at all?
No, I tried, I did, and I actually think that I met up with one of the friends, like, one time, but you know how study abroad programs are? It's like the minute you get there
Mhm.
first of all, you're with, like, 30 Americans from I was with 30 Americans from all over the country, so that was, like, also a whole 'nother experience. I hadn't met people from Texas and California and all these different types of people, so I was, like, so in that group right away that, I mean, I probably didn't think about anything else for, like, at least a month. I was just, like, so into the experience.
Right, right. And so, it sounds like originally the plan was for 1 semester and it grew to a 2nd semester. So, what was your decision process like for that? I mean, sounds like an easy decision perhaps, but I know for me when I did study abroad that there were so many things to consider in terms of, in my case, trying to find a summer internship, or I actually went in the spring semester, and so it would have been difficult to stay for an extra fall. But things like that. Just what was your thought process, and how did you even decide maybe to go back after 2 semesters? I don't know if you could have stayed for longer, but just curious on your thoughts.
I mean, I could have stayed for
Yeah,
longer, but I feel like I knew I had to graduate, because
right.
once that's a slippery slope. Like one semester is like fine, but after that I'm probably not going to go back to college, you know what I mean? So like I
Sure.
knew I had to go back. Um and I wanted to, I wanted to get the degree, but my I met my best friend who's still my best friend now. She was part of the study abroad group, Tracy.
Mm.
And Tracy and I were like two peas in a pod right away. I think we met at the airport, literally like before the program even started. Like she was at the airport. And we were having this like similar feeling where we just couldn't imagine this being over. And because she also was feeling that way and we were vocalizing it together, it helped me. I think we fed off each other, but it was just like, does this have to be over? Like, could we stay? And if we stayed, what would we do? And I think I knew that I had to like find an excuse. So what I did was I
Mhm.
I, I researched and found an advanced Spanish program where like my Spanish would get really good. And I could also, through that program, volunteer teaching English. And technically, I was studying to be a Spanish teacher, so I could get some teaching experience in there. And so I
Mhm.
found a way to do it. Had Tracy
Mhm.
not also been convincing her parents at the same time, I don't know if I would have really, had the nerve to do it. But I just knew, and I'm so glad I followed my gut, because if I hadn't gone to Antigua, like I wouldn't have that whole thing, and I can't imagine, where my life would be now. I just knew, like what there's nothing I was missing in the cornfields of Illinois at the University of Illinois. Like there was nothing I was missing there. I was all good to stay, and I just knew. I followed my gut. I really did.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That tends to take us to good places, even if sometimes you have to, well, check it to make sure that it is leading you in the right direction. But usually
Right.
it's a good way to operate. Yeah.
Totally.
And so then you went to Antigua. You thought this place is amazing. So what was it about there that really stuck out to you and thought and made you think this is where I need to be? I'm sure there's many aspects, but it's always interesting when we, travelers or just expats or whatever you want to call us, end up in a place where we really feel some connection to it. And I know I've had that a couple times, and now I've tried to live in those places. So curious on what was going through your head and what really hit your heart, I guess, about the place.
Yeah. So Costa Rica I had gotten used to, right, by that point. I was there probably like 6 months or something in total before I got to Guatemala. And Costa Rica is completely different. Like you can, if you're young or just you don't know and it's easy for you to stereotype, Central America or Latin America can all be one thing. Like it could be in your mind Mexico. Like it's really easy to just simplify things that way. And I wasn't doing it consciously, but Costa Rica is a specific type of place. You have people are relatively light skinned. There is no, you don't come across people in indigenous dress. There are still some, indigenous programs, but like you don't come across it on the street. People aren't wearing the indigenous like clothes in Costa Rica. And there were really interesting cultural things in Costa Rica where, the Caribbean side is mostly black, and the rest of the country is more mestizo or whatever. And those were really
Mhm.
interesting history lessons for me, blew my mind about why that was. And I loved learning about that.
Mhm.
And when I got to Guatemala, I don't know what I was expecting, but whoa, there was a whole separate set of circumstances there. I mean, when I got to first, I went to Tikal to the ruins, the Mayan ruins, and that just was like I didn't know about the Mayans in that way, like seeing all that history and
Mhm.
understanding the significance of it. And then getting to Antigua, and I didn't know about backpackers. I just didn't know about
Mhm.
vagabond, dirty backpackers. And I wanted to be one right away. Like, so I got to Antigua and there were little, indigenous women wearing the full on, traje indígena, and the men also, had this very specific way of dressing. And they would be walking down the street with, I remember seeing like an 8 foot tall Swedish guy, or, he had to be Swedish or something, or, Norwegian. And he was white, and had blonde hair, and they were sharing the streets. And it was because, Antigua is really like a crossroads for backpackers. And I was like, whoa, there is a lot
Mm.
more going on here than I realized. And it was a world I wanted to be in. But also in Antigua, you can see there's a volcano right in front of you. It's called Agua. It does not erupt. And then there's a volcano, over to the side of you that is called Fuego, and it's always erupting. And I just had
Mm.
never, I mean, the actual earth felt significant to me there in a way. I mean, obviously Costa Rica has jungle, but that's so different. And man,
Mhm.
everything about it, it just blew my mind. And then the culture, I went for Semana Santa. And that is just an
Mm.
amazing procession. So seeing
Mm.
that as well, I mean, it was just the whole world, I feel like, came alive to me at that point.
Wow. So it sounds like culturally, I mean, I guess broadly speaking, culturally, it really hit you and it was just grabbed you and you didn't want to leave.
No, I mean, I remember learning at that point that in Guatemala they speak 33 languages. And I was like, what do you mean? You
Wow.
don't just speak Spanish,
Right.
And then I remember
Right.
having to there was a woman selling me something and she didn't even speak Spanish, and like that
Mm.
never occurred to me that she might speak some, other like more indigenous language. And the fact that I had to be like cuatro and like show her my own fingers and be like four, like that, I mean, everything about
Right.
it was just so new and different that yeah, I was also really young. So everything new is what I wanted right away.
Right. Of course. So you come back from that experience, you come back from 2 semesters in around Costa Rica, and then how do you end up making that move to Guatemala following your graduation? Was there any special route, or how did you support yourself? How did you make it happen? How long between graduation and when you went there? Just give us the play by play.
Yeah, I got some graduation money, as you hopefully do.
Hmm.
And you don't, this was also a while ago. I can admit how long ago, but like quite some time ago now.
Hmm.
And so things were cheaper even than they are now. But I got some graduation money. I worked that summer. I had always been like a day camp counselor, so I was just a day camp counselor that summer. And then in August, I just went. I didn't have a job. I wasn't really worried. I knew how cheap it was. Tracy had gone before me because she's actually 1.5 years older. I like to emphasize the half. She's way older than me. And Tracy had already gone. So she graduated. She took the semester off. She did a whole bunch of summer courses and graduated. And then she actually moved down like maybe 9 months before me. Um, so I just moved in where she was living with the people that she was living with. So that was nice. But I could have lived in a hostel or something and figured it out. And then I just started trying to find a job teaching English, which I knew that I would do. I'd use my degree and teach English. And it took about a month, and I will date myself just to tell this part of the story, but my job interview at the school that I actually ended up working at was actually on September 11th, 2001. So I was supposed to have this interview with the American co-director because it was a bilingual school, and she was just like, "Sorry, I can't talk. There's something going on. The Twin Towers have been hit." And then she ran away, and I was like, "I hope I got the job." And then I went home and I was like, "Oh, this is obviously a humongous deal that I didn't recognize." So yeah, and then I got a
Right,
job.
right.
I did a bunch of private classes, and within a few months, I had pretty much everything sorted out.
So, how did your time there evolve over those 2 years? Of course, it sounds like you had a relatively easy landing. You got things set up after a couple months. But yeah, maybe just tell us a bit about those 2 years and what might have changed in terms of your friend group or what you were doing with your time. I mean, did you get a chance to really integrate more into the society there? Were you traveling every weekend? Just let us know how it was.
Yeah, you know what? It was really interesting. So I would say that no, in Guatemala, I actually did not integrate the way that looking back now, would have wanted to. I got so wrapped up. Because for me, what happened was I moved to Antigua. I moved into this house, and all of a sudden we're like the real world Antigua. Like there was a guy from Norway, there was a woman from Germany, there was a guy from Canada. The woman who owned the house, she was from El Salvador, and we just had a blast all the time. I love these people. Everyone was so different. Um, Tracy lived there as well, obviously. And so I went out a lot. I was very active in the
Mm-hmm.
evenings, you could say. Had a
Hmm.
blast there. And then I also met my first girlfriend. I had never had a girlfriend before, and I met her there, and she was German. And she spoke perfect English. I didn't really even register that she was German, but she worked at a German bar. So then we would always go to this German bar, which I knew nothing about Germany. I was really just so undereducated, I have to say. But I went to this German bar, and now I'm hanging out with like these old, scraggly German dudes who had been living in Guatemala for like, 20 years or something or longer. And it was just that usurped my experience. We traveled a lot. We went all around Guatemala. Took there's a bus. I don't know if it still runs called the Tika bus, which goes back and forth up and down Central America. And so you can go from, for example, Guatemala to Costa Rica. It takes 3 days, and we did that a couple of times. 3 days down, and then you're there for 2 weeks, and then 3 days back. It's like a whole thing. And technically, at the school where I taught English, I was a volunteer. It was very covert. They paid us into a bank account, but I still had to do the visa runs.
Mm.
So every 90 days I had to leave
Okay.
and, go to
Okay.
a different country, because technically I didn't work there, um, which was fine. I mean, that was always fine. And, so my friend group, it changed because everyone's from somewhere else, you know?
Hmm.
But the other thing that was a little bit difficult in Guatemala for me was that I don't know what I don't know how I could have connected better, but I definitely felt like the locals that I was meeting were either like they all ran some kind of like either a bar, a restaurant, or a school, but
Hmm.
I just couldn't really like connect in the way that I wanted to. And maybe that's because my focus was elsewhere. But I definitely didn't like culturally like integrate the way that I could have. But Antigua is also a really special place, but their focus is a lot on tourism. And so there's just so much opportunity. I met backpackers from all over the world. In fact, I learned more about Israeli culture living in Antigua than I could have ever, than I learned maybe about Guatemalan culture, honestly. So it was a crossroads for all these different cultures. Yeah, and so after 2 years, I ended up going back to the States for a little while to work, and then my girlfriend from there, we moved to Germany then after that.
How did the timing on that work out? I mean, it sounds like indeed that was the plan that you had, but was there sort of a discussion of 2 years, maybe that's enough time here in Guatemala, or were there other factors at play that ended up having you both move to Germany?
Oh, there were lots of factors. First of all, plan is
Mm.
a very generous word. I was a total,
Right.
like, ping pong what do you call it? A pinball? I was just like, bing, 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 like,
Mhm.
bouncing off the sides of whatever I hit, I mean but no, my mom was sick, actually. My mom, had kidney
Mm.
disease, and so she was getting a transplant that summer, so I did go home to, like, help take care of her. And then but also, I mean, that was obviously a big part of it. My girlfriend and I were we were so young and dumb and, like, off and on, and so I think we had, like, technically broken up at the time for a minute. And also, though, I think we both realized, like, we were also so poor. Like, I made
Mm.
$250 a month, so why save it? Like, I could have saved
Right.
because my rent was really cheap. My rent was, like, $100 or something because we split a house. And my expenses were
Right.
super low, but, like, why save the extra 20 bucks, over a year? Like, what is how much money is that? So, we just realized, like, we were just never I could never even fly like, I was using that graduation money to fly home, to buy plane tickets home. I mean, it wasn't sustainable no matter what. I knew I didn't wanna live there. It's not easy living. I mean, it might be a little bit easier now, but it's also, I was never gonna make a lot of money. I wasn't and not that I need a lot, but, like, I was never gonna make a livable wage to be someone who needed to keep flying home to visit. And so I think, all signs really
Right.
pointed toward this is a temporary experience for me right now. Yeah. But, because I already dated myself, there was no, like, working online. Like, I couldn't, the internet was like I
Right.
literally worked at an internet cafe where people would go to check their email, you know what I mean? So, like, I wasn't running an
Right.
online business. So, that was what I was gonna earn, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So then in terms of deciding that it would be Germany, that was just based on your girlfriend's desire or interest or willingness to go back to Germany, I guess.
Yeah, and she would have been in the States, but, like, we were not gonna sit there and figure out immigration policy. That just seemed
Yeah.
so
Sure.
hard. She was a
Of
bartender in
course.
Guatemala. I'm
Yeah.
not sure there was, like, a visa available for her unique talent at pouring German beer, you know?
Right, right. Then so you moved to Germany and didn't have a ton of money from that time that you spent in Guatemala and you don't speak German and you're going with a relationship and just tell me kind of what was going through your mind and what how you sort of planned. I know again plan is maybe a strong word, but just thinking through kind of that big jump because it sounds from the outside like it was quite a big leap, but maybe it was just the most obvious thing for you to do at the time. So would love your
No, it
thoughts
was
on
a
it.
huge leap. You know what? It was really big. And of course, with hindsight, looking back, it was even bigger. I knew so little about Germany at the time that there was a project in my class in Guatemala where I can't even remember what the project was. But a student of mine had drawn a map and he had gotten the map from an old like encyclopedia or something. And it still had East and West Germany. So when he drew the map, he actually
Mm,
drew East and West Germany. And one of the moms was this was like one of the last days of school. And one of the moms was so mad that I would hang that up. But I was like, well, I just want to present the work because it's the last day of school. I just want them to feel special. And she was like, there is no more East Germany. The wall fell, however long ago. And like, I didn't even really know any of that stuff. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't even really know. And
right.
so that was like a really, that was really, that just goes to show you, you know what I mean? How little I knew. It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
But then I guess you learn that pretty quickly, right? I mean, I also had that experience in Germany where I didn't know the history that well, and then to find out the difference between the East and the West Germany, especially living in a city like Berlin, and people still talking about the differences, even I don't know, 30 30 years after, I guess, the wall fell, something like that. And it's just, it was interesting to me. Like I was on, there's almost that part of me where I thought it's like, guys, that's old history now, but it's still very relevant, still very real,
Oh,
still very,
like,
part of
so
it.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was really part of it for me. I ended up moving to East Germany, and I didn't even know that's where I was moving, but I moved straight up to Erfurt, which is the capital of Thuringia, which was definitely East Germany,
Mhm.
and so, as an American moving to East Germany, that was like I had so many lessons to learn for sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, so I got to Erfurt, which was, of course, a city I had never heard of. I didn't know anything. I didn't speak any German, but I wasn't really that nervous because, I think this is something you and I have discussed before. But once you move abroad once, going to the second or the third country, you have a skill set that really only applies to that specific situation, which is you can just get up and move pretty easily, and you know that nothing's forever in a way that when it's your first time, it feels so much bigger. So for me, it was like, if this doesn't work out, I'll find an alternative. I knew I could go to Costa Rica. I knew I could go to Guatemala. I knew I could go home. There were lots of options. So I didn't feel so nervous. But when I got there, I realized that I know nothing about Europe. Like, I didn't take European
Mhm.
history. I had only learned about Latin America in college. And so it was pretty mind blowing to arrive in this place. I love it. I love learning. So I just chewed it all up. But it was stressful. It wasn't super easy. It was big.
Yeah. And it sounds like through your Spanish, you were able to get really good at that. And maybe would you consider yourself a language learning person in terms of that being an area of passion for you or something that you're particularly good at? Or is that something that you just learned out of kind of, I mean, an interest, but also necessity?
Well, it's interesting. When you say necessity, I will say that I studied Spanish.
Hmm.
I lived in two countries. I, studied to teach it. I know the grammar, but man, am I better at German. I can laugh in German. I can have fun in German. I feel much more comfortable in German. Most people wouldn't think like, oh, German, I'm sure that's easier than Spanish. And the reason why is because I needed it. And when you
Right.
need it, it bakes into a deeper level. So that's for
Hmm.
sure. Necessity definitely helps when it comes to language learning. I ask a lot of questions around language learning because I studied to be a language teacher, and when I became fluent in German without taking a class, I quit. I quit teaching. I went and got a master's degree because I kind of realized that the way we teach languages is wrong, and I didn't like it anymore because I knew that unless you can really create incentive and need, and you can't do that in traditional language learning. It's very much like here's a book, like memorize the grammar. Um, and so, yeah, that, learning languages, it comes naturally to me for, I think, two reasons. One, I'm super curious. I love to make connections.
Hmm.
When I realized that Latin, which I don't speak and I don't want to learn, but when I realized that Latin was the root of like several languages, I realized that I could figure out, I could muddle my way through French or Italian because of these similarities that all come from Latin. And I loved learning that stuff. With German, I put together clues and I was a detective. And I was willing to make mistakes and sound really dumb. And I think that's the other factor. You have to be really curious and you have to be willing to sound like an idiot. And if you are, which I am, you
Right.
can get much more fluent much more quickly.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it is definitely to jump in with both feet and be willing to make mistakes. I think that's also the hardest thing for most of us to do. I can put myself in that boat.
Yeah. No, it's not easy at all. And I will say, look, when I lived in Germany, and I'm sure we'll talk about my time there, I actually did go to the doctor once for like a stress test because I was having these like chest pains. And it was because
Mhm.
I was under a lot of stress, like it's great now in hindsight, really proud of myself and stuff, but like at the time it takes its toll. It's not always easy. It was hard. And there's nothing wrong with me and that was fine. But
Mhm.
it was definitely big. There's a lot of factors. And so yeah, it was hard. But at the same time, it's literally the only way that you can become fluent.
Yeah, yeah. So how long would you say it took you to become, I guess, to get to a level of fluency where maybe you're not at your peak, or you could always be better, or this or that, but that got you around comfortably day to day?
So I would say within 6 months, I could do all of the normal stuff, like go to the grocery store and as long as I could anticipate the majority of the interactions, it would be fine. But at a party or something, I everyone had to speak
Mm.
English or I would just go sit in a corner.
Yeah.
After a year, I think I was definitely missing a lot of words, but fluent. And 2 years is when I was just like straight up hanging out, not even thinking about it, dreaming in German, preferring German, that sort of thing.
That's great. That's great. And it's good to hear that you're able to laugh in German as well. I don't know if that's always the connection most people make with German, so it's good to hear
No,
that.
I know. What's fun? For me, what was really fun about Germany was Germans know that they're so German. I mean,
Mhm.
people who have a sense of humor about themselves, I mean, obviously the really serious ones get offended, but like Germans know that they're ridiculous in certain ways. And like you can really kind of poke fun at like the really German things that they do, and also poke fun at their language because German's such an interesting language where you build off these as long as you know a bunch of really small words, you can build them together and
Mhm.
that's how you get larger words. But you can play with that. You can be silly, you can play dumb, and they are very self-aware at their Germanness. And so that was a way that I was able to fit in where I wasn't so German, but I could still like really like dovetail this like personality that I kind of developed. But yeah, I could be funny. And as long as they're cool, they really get it. They get it.
That's great. And I believe there you were basically working as an English teacher as well. So, how did you get those jobs straight away? And what would you recommend ultimately for people that, of course, if they speak English, maybe that's a great option. But what about for non native speakers of English? Because for me as well, I get a number of questions from different people all over the world saying, what could I do online or what can I do easily to get me to this country or that country? And it's so easy to say English teaching, but if they're not a native speaker of English, or they're not at that level of C2 level or whatever the requirement is to be able to do that, it becomes a little bit harder to give those recommendations. So if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, of course. I went to Berlitz. It was on like the town square. It was right there. I went there. I had a couple of different interviews at language schools, but Berlitz only hires native speakers. And so, because they only hire native speakers, they get a lot of visas issued because that's sort of mandatory that comes with it. And so, yeah, I got a job teaching at Berlitz. I only got, it was like 20 hours to start, and the pay wasn't like amazing. And so I also ended up getting a job at another language school, which I was able to do because I had the visa through Berlitz. The visa allowed me to teach English. It did not specifically specify Berlitz, which was really lucky, actually.
Mm,
And so I was able to
right.
teach at both. Um, and then both of my schedules filled up. The two schools were about 100 meters apart, which I didn't realize how lucky that was at the time. So I would schedule like 3 classes at Berlitz and then run over in 5 minutes and teach like a half a day over there and then do night classes at Berlitz. I mean, I taught all the time. My schedule was so full. Yeah, so within about 3 months, I had two like very full time jobs. Um, Berlitz is a great option, or if there are other schools that are similar, I'm not sure. But the reason why Berlitz is great is you only have to be a native speaker and have a bachelor's degree in literally anything, and the lessons are already planned.
Mm,
You adding your own
mhm,
flourish is fine, but not even necessary or expected. You pretty much follow their because they have this immersion method that they do, and so you literally it's like word for word if you want it to be. So you don't have to have any teaching experience and you don't have to do lesson plans and all that stuff. Now, if you are a non-native speaker, I will say Berlitz is still a good option. Language schools are still a good option
mm,
depending on what language you do speak because you know, I taught a lot of CEOs or C-suite executives because they need to learn the language where they do business, and Germans do business around the world. And so you might, especially
right.
Spanish, but also Japanese. There were definitely some. My CEOs were taking both English and Japanese classes at the same time. But yeah, it just depends on the industry and the city where you live. Yeah, it's very ambitious. And so
Yeah.
that's teaching is still an option for sure. But Germany has some visas. There's the freelancer visa that exists,
Mhm,
and in Berlin specifically, I believe Berlin specifically has the artist visa that goes along with that freelancer visa. Where if you're a working artist, you can get a year long visa, and that's those are the main visas are if you can provide a service that no German can provide, and that's the real
Hmm.
difficulty. That's why teaching is such an option, because being a native speaker, you are better. So you
Hmm.
get that job, you have the advantage. And then the freelancer visa is good. So basically, you just kind of have to prove, like, I run, for example, a social media marketing agency. I have 3 German clients who are interested in working with me. I can do business here. And then you prove that and you can
Right.
get a visa. It works. There are other visas that you can get for Germany. You can get hired by a German company and things like that. But those are obviously more difficult to get. But Germany, even though it's very rule driven and very organized, and
Mm.
also all the paperwork is in German, which sucks, because German
Yeah.
visa and tax is very hard language to learn or decipher. Um, but you can get it. You can definitely get it. There are definitely options for Germany which can be easier than some other European countries. So it's a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did you decide then after 3 years that it was time to go back and get your master's degree?
Because I kind of saw what I did every day as a little bit of a farce. I was teaching English, which there's nothing to be said for, people who are teachers. Obviously, you should be a teacher. I was frustrated because I loved Germany. And, looking back, I'm
Mm.
surprised I left. I mean, it was really where I came into my own.
Mm.
I was 23 to 26 there. My entire worldview was formed when I was there. Like, my political opinions and my knowledge of history and all that happened in those years when I lived there. Um, I loved it there. But Germans like to learn by the book. They like to
Mm.
open a book and do grammar because to them, they feel like they're doing something. And that was really hard for me because I knew it was like I was teaching that way because that's the way they want to learn. But I was the one who 3 years ago couldn't say anything except for beer, and then
Mm.
order a beer. And
Yeah.
now I'm hanging out with my students who are my age on the weekend in German because you're not learning, but I am. And there's a reason why I'm learning and you're not. And it's because
Right.
unless you need it, you're not going to learn it. And my only students that I ever had that had the most success were these older students. They were all, I mean, I'm older now. I bet looking back, they were probably my age, but they felt so old.
Sure.
They were unemployed, and in Germany, there's a lot of programs for unemployed
Mm.
people. And they were unemployed. And in order to get their money, their monthly money from the government, they had to take English and then they had to do kind of like a work abroad program. So they all went to English speaking countries for 3 months.
Mm.
Well, guess who came back fluent? I would these people who would be like,
Mm.
"Hello, Jessica," and could not speak any English to start, came back and were speaking English to me. And it's like, what am I
Yeah.
doing? I just felt, for me, it was tough. I was starting to feel this, like, sort of, maybe it was an existential quarter life crisis or something. Um, at the same time, I was also very aware because this was around the time that so like George Bush was reelected, Hurricane Katrina happened. There were these things where I was seeing them
Mm.
through the German media filter, and my American friends were seeing it only through American breaking news filters. And I started to become aware of media
Right.
literacy. And I just realized I wanted to I wanted to learn more about that. And that was really important to me. And so I did a certificate in Germany in intercultural business communication, which helped me understand intercultural communication, which I had never focused on before. And then, so I went to the University of Sussex in England, actually, and I got a master's in media and culture studies because I just knew that that was something that was a lot richer for me at the time to understand. Um, and I didn't see where English teaching was really going to take me, you know.
Right. Right. No, that makes sense. In terms of the decision to go to Sussex, then obviously different programs have different opportunities, and maybe that was the best fit for you. But did you consider other countries, or even for that matter, staying somewhere inside of Germany, or was it, hey, this is my opportunity to get to yet another country and have another adventure?
No, I think I was glad they spoke English because so I did that the certificate, the intercultural communication certificate. I did it in German ish. So I learned in German and then I was able to write my papers in English because like I didn't have that level of German, like academic German, which is surprisingly difficult.
Hmm.
But I knew that it was really hard, especially because you have these grooves in your brain where you're taking in this like very interesting information in German and then having to write it in English. It was really hard for me to process and like do that and communicate and articulate my ideas that way. So I thought, okay, I'll try and do a degree in English. Now, there are universities in Germany that I could have studied at, and they were cheaper because they were
Hmm.
like free or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
I don't know why in the end I decided to go for Sussex, but I did. I went and did a whole tour in England and looked at like 6 or 7 universities there. I just really liked Brighton, where I would be living. There was something about London at the time I wasn't ready for. Of course, I moved there after, but I just wasn't ready for such a big city at the time. I loved Brighton. It was on the water. It just kind of felt right. Yeah, and so I applied for that program, and I got in, and I went there.
So after that, it sounds like indeed you did end up in London. So how did your opinion change about maybe the timing or what you wanted out of the next location? And I mean, of course, London's where the opportunities are. I mean, by and large, of course, there's plenty of other places, great cities as well. But London's the most kind of obvious choice for, I guess, getting your career in the UK. But just curious on how you came around on that, because I feel like from my perspective, I went big city. I did Tokyo and Berlin, and now I'm in a very small city. So I kind of feel like I went the opposite direction. So I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, London was interesting. So basically, when I was in Brighton, there aren't a lot of jobs, and I wanted to do an internship, and I got an internship at the at Visit Brighton. Visit Brighton is the tourism board for Brighton and Hove. So I got an internship there, and through that connection, I ended up getting a job. I had a job interview and a job at Visit England, which was in London.
Mm,
Somebody connected me. So I kind of just took that opportunity as soon as I graduated, and I went there. But partially because I started to, at that point I was a little bit older, and I had this sort of past experience now, and I realized that it was all related to either travel or expat life. And so when it came to media and the type of media that I wanted to do, PR jobs were everywhere. There were PR jobs, everywhere.
mm,
And of course, in London, there are thousands of PR jobs or communications roles. And I needed a job, but I definitely wanted to stay in the travel sector because I just realized like that's the sum of my life so far. There's all kinds of stuff in there, teaching, whatever. But the travel piece, or at least the seeing the world piece, was what I wanted to bring in to the next job. So yeah, so I got a job at Visit England,
right.
and then that kind of carried me through my London life. I Visit England and Visit Britain are the same offices. One just focuses on
Mm,
international attractions and attracting
mm,
international visitors, and one focuses on domestic. But I worked at both throughout those 3 years, and and then I did a little stint at Rosetta Stone, which I did not enjoy.
mm.
Back to the language learning thing, but I did. And so yeah, but I really focus on travel and the media. I mean, I worked in media. I hosted international press a lot of the time, did things like that.
Right. And how did you find the life there? I mean, it sounds like it was great from a professional perspective. It gave you that, opportunity for those 3 years. But did you ever consider that as the spot that you would, I don't know, set down some roots or something like that, or it was always just a stepping stone to the next opportunity?
No way. I didn't know. Like hindsight's 2020. I didn't have like for sure the plan, like I didn't, but I just London never felt like home to me. I loved certain things about London. I mean, the center of the universe. People from every edge of the planet live there, and I lived among them. I mean, I lived in Edgware Road, which, I was talking about this the other day, but like I had never come across like so many different ways to be culturally in Edgware Road. There was like literally every single culture all in one place. It was amazing. And, then I moved to Shepherd's Bush, another area, and it was like all Australians. Why all Australians live in Shepherd's Bush? I don't know, but they do. Maybe it's because it says the bush and they're used to that from Australia, and so they live there. I don't know, but they're everywhere. And so there was just like all these like cultural nuances that were fascinating. It's funny though, in London, I actually kind of like became more American in a way because I think of it like this, like chords in music, right? Like there was something about like German and American that made like a nice chord. We were just different enough, but similar enough that we sounded good together. I felt good there. In London, for
Mm,
some reason, like British and American for me, the strings were too close together. The notes were too close. It was discordant. It
mm,
didn't sound right for me. It didn't feel good. I understood the language, but I didn't know what any of it meant. I mispronounced things all the time. People made
mm,
fun of my Americanness. mostly lighthearted ways, but I mean, Brits are Brits and, they have a dry sense of humor and I
Yeah.
don't. I'm really like earnest and like, excited and vulnerable, and
Right.
British people are sort of the opposite. And so there were all these little things where it's like so close, but I didn't really fit. So yeah, so I knew it wasn't forever. And um, you know, actually the pay is really low. And so I was never gonna
Yeah.
like again, I
Yeah.
was never gonna for what it was worth, my rent was so high and, costs were so high, it was just not sustainable for me forever.
I'm not sure who it's sustainable for forever, but maybe that's a separate conversation. It's
Well,
just
I did
in
move to
terms of the
I have
financial
lived in
part.
Brooklyn as well. Yeah, who
Yeah,
knows?
true, true. Yeah. That's a good point. But it sounds like then eventually your working experience there came to a wrap for one reason or another, and you decided to go off and essentially be a digital nomad. I guess that's the right term for it. So would love to hear about that, how you decided basically to make that jump, what was involved in that, and especially as a travel blogger, how you did it, because I think so many people are trying to figure out a way to make that work, right?
Yeah, it's hard. So basically, at Visit Britain, Visit England, I was dealing with a lot of press. And a lot of what you do is you pre write a lot of material and you provide it to the press. It could be in press releases or just providing paragraphs and all that stuff. And I had a newsletter that was called the What's Hot newsletter, and it went to all the media around the world that were on our list. And I would, keep everyone informed of like all these awesome, underground things that were happening in the UK, especially in London, but all around the UK, because that's what we did. And I loved it, finding this stuff out and writing about it and all this stuff. And then like I would open, a German newspaper, a Sunday travel section, or a British newspaper, and like word for word what I had written. No offense to the journalist, but like so close to what I wrote would show up in the paper.
Right,
And I
right.
was like, well, if I'm good enough to see some of my words in print, let's be real, maybe I like this part of the media. Maybe I want to be producing the media rather than supplying it. I mean, the international press visits person that I was there, the job was rad. We got to go all around the UK. I hosted journalists from everywhere. I mean, I got to like speak German all the time, Spanish, and like show them all these cool things. It was awesome. Every time a new hotel opened, like when the Beatles hotel opened or whatever, like it was awesome. It's a silly, fun, amazing job. But I was like, I'm writing this stuff and I love writing. I mean, I had always loved it. And it had always stuck in my head. Langston Hughes, in his autobiography, he talked about how he just wanted to make a living from writing. And when I read that, I think I was like
Mm,
20, and I was like, it always stuck in my mind. I make a living from writing. It's like amazing.
mm.
And so I thought, let's have a go at this. And my girlfriend at the time and she was a photographer, like amateur, and I was an amateur writer. But at the same time that all this was swirling through my head, we also learned about house sitting. There was an article in the Guardian
Mm.
about this British couple who had house sat a house in Tuscany, which I did end up doing in the future. And I was like, so they lived there for free. They didn't pay rent. They made money because at this time there was the internet and you could do that. And it all just sounded
Right.
right. So, like just how dominoes fall, one thing led to another. And like, yeah, we founded a blog and got a house sitting gig in LA, got some really cheap plane tickets over from the UK. And then from there, just, yeah, 4 years of digital nomading. In terms of like how we actually made money, that was tough. We took a lot of freelance work.
Mm.
I had a lot of different freelance clients, writing clients, and things like that, trying to make a go at making a living from writing. The blog didn't start to make money for a long time, and I'm not sure you could even do the same today. I think a lot of people put their energy into
Mm.
like having Instagram accounts,
Mm.
being influencers and things like that. We were not influencers in that way, but definitely made, at the end of the day, enough money to live, which is all we really wanted because it sustained that.
Mhm.
But there was I did a lot of outside work to like keep that going, all related. But I would say that the website itself probably was like 70% or so of my income.
And in terms of the content that you were putting there, was it about your travel experiences, or how did you make it maybe different, or for that matter, the same as other successful blogs out there?
Yeah, I wouldn't say different. The only thing that was different was that we were 2 women in a relationship traveling together, so we got pigeonholed a lot into, like, the LGBT travel space, which is fine.
Mm,
I was always,
mhm.
like, a little hot cold on that because it's like you're supposed to find your unique selling point, and that was definitely ours, but nothing I did felt particularly gay at any time. I wasn't like, "Oh, we went to see a pyramid." I felt so gay there. Like, that just wasn't it. I didn't feel that
Right.
way, and so I just run hot and cold on that specific niche in that way, but so yeah, I mean, I think to differentiate ourselves, that was definitely part of it. The other thing is like I think that the what we tried to do was longer form, very informative, and I wanted you to be able to trust us. Like if we did a hotel review, it was
Mhm,
because we stayed there and we would give honest opinions. There were times we did not publish a review. Like there were times where a hotel hosted us
mm.
and I said, "You're not going to want me to put this out." Like I'll review the restaurant instead because it was good. But you're not going to want me to say what I think about the hotel. So honesty, I feel was a
Right.
big part of it, and it mattered. And so I think we were pretty truthful on that front.
Yeah, that's great. And did you do, many house sitting, experiences after that, or was that kinda just the beginning? Ho did you use it to get around essentially?
Yeah, I did 18 house
Yeah.
sits over 4 years. I wrote a book on it called "Break Free: The Ultimate Guide to House Sitting." And yeah, I would recommend house
I
sitting
love
to
that.
anyone all the time. Oh yeah, it is. It is such an awesome way to see the world. A, you don't pay rent. B,
Mhm,
you get it's like think about it. So I did 2 months living in a small town on the beach called Ishkalak, Mexico. You've never heard of it, you've never been there. But an American has a house there. What kind of an American has a house in Ishkalak, Mexico? Well, I got to meet that person as well as take care of his house. You meet the people who have the time to go away for 2 or 3 months at a time, those are pretty interesting people who live, against the grain. Like, even the people that you meet are so awesome. So, free rent, awesome. The houses are usually really nice. You get to have pets because when you travel, you can't have a pet. And so it's nice to, like, have pets for a small amount of time. I definitely cried a lot when I left some of the pets because I love them so much.
yeah.
And it's a way to also like, I did a house in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, way outside of the
Mm,
city center in a high rise for 2 Canadians that went home. I never would have seen that part of Malaysia, but, like, I have memories of, like, the parking lot of the building and just, like, seeing signs there. I know that's so silly, but, like, I mean, you couldn't be more integrated, such a different way to
right,
see
right.
real life abroad.
Yeah, and I love this idea of there being this option that I'm sure not a lot of people are aware of. Or, of course, the people that are in the know are in the know, but I think it deserves to be, shared more and given as an opportunity and option for people. So I'm really glad that you brought it up.
Yeah, well, also, I would like to point out that the other thing that house sitting does is show you that you can trust people
Mm,
and people can trust you and you don't have to be afraid of strangers and you can live in someone's house for 3 months and like that's okay and you use their cups and plates and do their dishes and like it creates like thicker fibers of your net of your view of the world. It's like people are good and you can really get to know them and nobody's out to murder you. I think especially Americans have this view of stranger danger,
right.
which obviously, operate with caution, but like it really made me realize like how good people are.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you were living the life of many people's dreams. You were doing the travel blogging, going here and there, not even paying rent. So why did you stop?
Oh man, when you put it that way, I don't know. No, listen. My relationship was definitely coming to an end. We were together for a very long time. And at some point,
Mm,
there was a lot of like personal things as well. But at some point, especially when you're travel blogging, one really interesting thing that happens is the way that you experience everything is mediated because I'm not thinking about it for me.
right.
I'm immediately thinking about how I'm going to write about it, the pictures we should take in order to cover it. And there's like a
Mm,
separation from the experience, which was actually after a while really, really hard because I stopped experiencing anything for myself. And I think that
mhm,
our relationship became a really business. It was just all the time working. It's really hard to run a travel blog and make money. It's hard and you have to work all the time. And it's like, oh, poor you, you're, in Singapore and you have to work. Yeah, I know, but it does add up and it is exhausting. And
mhm,
it was really hard.
right.
And so, we became more of like a professional couple anyway, after a while. So we were in Peru and did Machu Picchu. It's amazing. Came back.
Mhm,
We were in
mhm,
Cusco. and I broke my ankle in our hostel.
Mm.
They put a welcome mat over a hole rather than fix
Oh.
it. So I stepped into the hostel and I stepped down onto the welcome
Uh,
mat, welcoming me, and I twisted my ankle and I broke it. And we ended up. That was just kind of like I broke my ankle. 2 days later, we broke up. A week later, I'm living on a futon in my friend's house in Chicago in the middle of winter with a cast on my ankle.
right.
Um, and I hadn't lived in the U.S. for 15 years at that point, so it was
Mm.
definitely not how a person who plans would do it. But at the end of the day, it was like I was exhausted. I mean, I think it took me years to recover from, especially just like
Yeah.
everything. So it was definitely time. And then I stopped running the travel blog and all that stuff. So yeah, it was like a whole everything broke at once basically, and I ended up back in the States.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like you were running it for too hard for too long? Like you kind of knew that was happening, it sounds like, or did you maybe only realize it after you had a second to sit back and sit on that futon and realize, oh, we've been pushing it too hard. But kind of curious because at some level you wanted to keep it going, right? I mean, that's the thing is like the beauty of it, and as you say, there's this, oh, poor me, I'm here in Singapore or wherever, Malaysia, doing this or that, and oh, you get to have this awesome job. But it is, or I should say, it seems, not that I know, but it seems very challenging, very difficult to keep going. And when you don't have that home base, I can only imagine that then it's that much harder to really put a stop to it. So would just love to kind of hear your reflection on it.
It's really interesting. I had always kind of operated without a net. So I was really comfortable with that. I moved around a lot, and then, moving into being a nomad only made sense at some point. But it's very singular. Yeah, there I didn't I mean, of course I had a home to go to. My mother would kill me if she heard me say that. Of course I had a home to go to. But yeah, I didn't have like a place that was my own. Um so
Hmm.
travel blogging it's really hard because I had all these other ideas and they were big, and I think you had to grow an audience first and then develop these things. So you're not just covering what you're covering that day, that week, about that destination, about that review of the place. You're also thinking about all the ideas that you have and what you want to do. And then also you're planning, 2 months in advance a house that you just got, and a country you're going to go to, and visas you have to go to this other place. And then somebody's talking about Antarctica, and you're like, am I going to go to Antarctica? I mean, I could go to Antarctica. And you start to, it like never stops. All the
Hmm.
possibilities,
Hmm.
they never stop. It's kind of like a drug in a way. And then it also becomes the pattern
Hmm.
of your life, and you don't think about anything else. I don't think I knew I was as exhausted as I ended up
Mm.
being at the end. I mean, while I
Right.
was traveling,
Right.
I had dengue. That I had dengue, and that dengue
Mm.
fever took me down for like a year. It took me to get that back. I broke my toe, got ran by a cow, all all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it is exhausting, but
Right.
it's yeah, I'll tell you that story someday. And it's exhausting, but it's also such an adrenaline filled life that it's hard to see why you wouldn't keep doing it. And you're always hoping to make it big at some
Right.
point.
Right.
We were doing a lot of we were doing like what do you call them, like tests or show reels or whatever for HGTV shows that we're going to launch about like house sitters, or all these different things. You're always putting yourself on camera trying to get on a show or do a thing, and there was always something to look forward to, or try for.
Right. So, how was the adjustment to maybe not that constant stream of craziness
Horrible.
and adventure? And yeah, I can imagine that was a rough, landing.
I'm still not over it. No, I am.
Mm.
It just it's hard. So on the one hand, it was very welcome to slow down for a little while, but America's a really hard place to do that in, because life is it's so mandatory to figure things out, because you have to get health insurance, especially when you have a broken ankle.
Hmm.
You have to, figure out the job situation, because there's no net, there's no help, and things are really expensive. It's not a cheap place to live if you need things. If you drive a car, which you have to, or if you take cabs, whatever it is, it's an expensive, intense place to live. It's not walkable in most places, all things. And then when you do
Right.
move to a city that's walkable like New York, it's $1 million for your rent. It's not
Right.
an easy
Right.
place to fall down in. and so it was hard to be back. I think it took me a long time to process it all. So, and it wasn't until I started to meet, I had never known people that weren't like me. I'd been doing this since I was 19, 20 years old,
Hmm.
and everyone was like me. Everyone was an expat or a traveler or doing something or whatever. And it wasn't until I started to meet a lot of people who were like, that's amazing, that I was like, oh, yeah, it is amazing. But I didn't know that
Yeah.
because it had just that was my gear. I
Right.
just operated in this one gear. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
it was a hard adjustment. America's a tough place uh, to readjust. I have to say, it's a difficult country.
Yeah. So, as you discovered that your drive to be abroad and do all this crazy stuff was actually not normal, is that what led you to want to share about it more through writing How to Move Abroad and Why It's the Best Thing You'll Do, and also your podcast now called Adventure Calls? Just tell me about kind of
Yeah,
where that came from and sharing your inspiration and your stories.
yeah. I didn't have any idea that what I was doing was interesting or special or different. I really didn't. And I always also thought like, well, if people wanted to be doing this, they would be. And then it's
Hmm.
like I came
Right.
home and I can't tell you how many people I heard from, especially Americans. Wow, that's amazing that you did that. You're so lucky. Or wow, I could never do what you're doing, but I would love to live in Italy or whatever, all these. And I just felt like I could just feel, for some reason, I am not a perceptive person, I'm not extremely empathetic, I don't have this like amazing ability to read people, but I could feel these dreams that people were letting die just so they could like have health
Hmm.
insurance, like, or whatever. It's not
Right.
only health insurance,
Right.
but it's a great example. And I was feeling their like prison or whatever, and the fact that they thought I was lucky, I wasn't lucky. I just did it, and that's the difference. I just did
Hmm.
it. I took the
Right.
action to do the thing, and so that started to really become clear to me that there's a lot of people out there who it's just it a lot of it is lack of information. For some reason, I'm willing to fall on my face. I don't know why. I am a crash test dummy for this stuff. I didn't, especially, I
Mm.
recently have been called an OG, which makes me feel old. And like she did it before Google, someone said. And it's like, yeah, I did. Okay. Yes, I
Right.
did.
Right.
And I didn't have to look everything up, but now that there's Google, that's like extra helpful. Damn it. Um, but,
Right.
providing people with information, giving transparency to what it looks like on the other side, helping people understand the process. I realize that sometimes that's just what people need is just like the information, but also, so I wrote the book literally called How to Move Abroad and why it's the best thing you'll do. Because here is how to do it. I mean, it's just one person's recommendation,
Hmm.
right, of my life abroad. It's not my story. My story is woven in there, but it's very, very much a practical, tactical, step by step book. Um, so how to move abroad, but the first chapter is why it's the best thing you'll do because I think people know how to do a lot of things. I'm sure I could read a manual on how to fix my car, but I'm never going under the hood ever, ever. I need the inspiration to do
Right.
so. So I started the book off with why it's the best thing you'll do and all the lessons and what you take away from a life abroad. Um, and yeah, I wrote I wrote this book to give people the transparency, um, but I didn't intend on doing it at all. I had a life, a day job, lived in Brooklyn, all that stuff. And a friend of mine was moving to Austria. And she was like, hey, guess what? I'm moving to Austria in 3 weeks. And I was like, what? I didn't expect that at all. And she's like, do you have any advice for me? And I started to write her an email, left the meeting with her. I had already given her more advice than she probably wanted already in the meeting. And then I'm emailing her on my phone. And there was something about, I was talking to her and I had never been able to like find a voice in myself as a solo
Mm.
writer that I was comfortable with. And there was something about doing it on my phone, writing to her, that gave me a voice that I was really happy with. And that email, it was so long, it was like ridiculous. I brought it into my notes app. And for like 3 or 4 days straight, like every subway ride I took, everything, I was like writing her this like really long note. And then when she left, I was like, hey, super weird, but I'm going to give you a going away ebook. So I basically
Mm.
wrote her an entire ebook on everything to think about
Wow.
when moving abroad. And I thought, like, Jess, like, this is the kind of thing where if you would do it in your free time, it's what you should do for a living kind of things. And I just
Yeah.
realized, like,
Yeah.
I'm
Absolutely.
so passionate about this. Like, I gave someone a going away ebook. That's weird. So maybe I should write an actual book. And that's what sort of started this whole thing because I just realized. So I wrote the book. I worked on it for about another year and put it out. And then Adventure Calls, I started. actually started as a response to the pandemic and my fear that we would never travel again. So I just started talking to travel
Mm,
experts in my space to think about a post
mm,
pandemic world. But then when the book came out, I realized what people need is not just the how to. The how to is there, but I want people to know people like you, like the other people I have on the show who make it happen. And it's not just how. How is a thing. And yes, you have to know how to get a visa in the country you want to move to, but just you need a team of people around you who are all going for the same dream. Your friends and family, they're not on your team for this one because they're not doing those things unless they are,
right,
and that's amazing.
right.
But like if you don't have people around you, you need a team of people who are doing what you're doing. I mean, like I said, when I was in Antigua, look at all those people I met who were living these lives and they were like European and living abroad. I don't know if I would have wanted to move to Germany, but I had just met so many people for whom this was a normal way of life that I just went and kept doing those things. If I had never met all those, dirty backpackers when I was 20, would I have become a digital nomad? I don't know. But I wouldn't give a second of it back, no matter what, all the pain and,
Mhm.
all the different things that happened to me. And so Adventure Calls is more about meeting person after person and understanding not just how to do it, but like adding to your own team of people who inspire you to do the thing that you really want to do.
But here's the funny part to me is that for us, it was so obvious about these people that they're out there because we were these people and we met them on our journeys, right? But at the same time, it really highlights the fact, and as you have through your comments on it and all of this conversation, that it is not obvious to other people. And so I think it's great that you and I and plenty of others out there making podcasts that are focused on expat and digital nomad and all these great topics, travel, are able to bring that to life and really shine a light on it and show, hey, this is a life path. Because I was talking to somebody recently and it occurred to me that it was worth mentioning in that conversation that when I was working in investment banking and sitting in my cubicle, hating the life there and daydreaming about traveling or getting my one way ticket or my round the world ticket, that this was only me dreaming that. Nobody else in the office was dreaming about that. And it has taken now like 10 years for me to recognize that this is important to highlight, or just for me to recognize to myself. So I think it's great to be able to, yeah, as you say, have the inspiration, the why, the how, and then also your, digital virtual team of people to show you how it can be done.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing for me, all of that is to help people make the leap. But there's also this really important next part of this, which is so important to me, which is sort of like the mission behind it all for why I want to, waste my time trying to start something new again, and go through this whole process and marketing a book and
Mhm.
editing a show and all this stuff is because it also matters when you do live abroad. Maybe you live forever, but maybe it's just for 2 or 3 years and you come home. But the person that you are when you come back is you are more empathetic. You can look at people from different backgrounds and not just make assumptions or stereotypes like I did in the beginning. And you start to see the world through this like lens of where it's way more open. And especially for Americans, and I do focus on mostly Americans only because there are things that there are roadblocks and mental barriers that Americans have to get through that just like other people just
Mhm.
don't. We have taxes and the IRS and healthcare and all these things, but so I really do
Right.
focus on Americans. But we need to be able to default understand that we don't have all the answers, that we aren't always right, and understand what like actual like intercultural communication is in this country of the United States, even just. And we export Americanization, around the world, but we need to
Mhm.
import a lot of the empathy and the multicultural attitudes that exist elsewhere. So just the mere fact of living abroad is so important to me. Everyone should take a gap year. Everyone should study abroad. Everyone who possibly can in any way they can should go
Mhm.
abroad for 3 years and come home. And I would like to get as many, millions of Americans to do so, because just think of the empathetic effect that would have on the country,
Mhm.
in a decade or a generation. And so that's kind of what really drives me too. It's like it's a life path for you, but it's also world changing, or at least country, nation changing in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And that's been a big part for me as well. It's just, I've seen so many positive benefits. I know the people around me, like you and others that have done the same, have felt that. And so if I can help, a handful of other people in my own way to be able to experience that and hopefully have some positive experiences from it, as the rest of us have, then I think it's all worth it, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
So I know that kind of wraps up most of your story about where you've been and what you've been doing so far. So I'd love just to know how you think about the next few years. Of course, it's hard in this current pandemic situation. Nobody really knows what the future holds. But do you have any sort of intentions to try to move back to another country, or whether one you've lived before or a new one, or are you quite content and enjoying the time in Brooklyn, or I guess in New Jersey right now? So if you
Yeah, I
could
moved to New
share
Jersey
your
this
thoughts,
time.
yeah, that would be great.
Um, those are great questions. Yes, no one knows, what the future holds, but I think in terms of a real understanding of what the first half of my adult life was for, what the meaning
Mm,
of it all was. I think I really understand now that this is what drives me, and
mm,
helping people in any way that I can in this area is what drives me. So I definitely have a very clear direction in terms of like I want to take the show as far as it will go. Adventure Calls. There are definitely some other books I want to put out, and maybe have a master class that I'm planning right now. That are very specific on the tactics.
hmm
Now I'm not only an LGBT expat if I were to move abroad again, but I also have a family, and moving abroad with
hmm
kids, so like family, expat families, but then also like queer families who want to move abroad. There's just so many. I could I could hide if I wanted to. I could pass for straight if I felt unsafe. I could, kind of operate in a really clandestine way if I didn't want to address the fact that I was gay before as an expat. But now with my son looking at me and I want him to be proud of himself, we have to address all of that if we were to ever do those things.
mm,
So, really, really learning from other families that are already doing it, but kind of really focusing on that would be another in a how to move abroad series would be something I would definitely I'm looking to
right.
cover. um, and then telling longer form stories as well. So there are some expats out there that are just so unbelievable, and they became unbelievable while abroad. It's they were already probably really great people, but man, their stories are unbelievable. And I'd like to find longer form ways to tell those stories, whether it's documentaries, in the form of like a Netflix series. So I'm just putting that out in the ether. So if
Yeah,
anyone's hearing
make
this,
it happen.
there I am. A podcast, a longer form podcast series that's actually taken in, but from a network that can help produce those. But I just think that the storytelling aspect of this is really important to me. I love to help people with the tactical, practical. I also do coaching, expat coaching, and things like that. So I'm very open to those things. Working with people on a one-on-one basis brings back all the great things I loved about teaching. So I actually really
Mm,
love coaching
mm.
because of the same thing, and I love helping people one-on-one accomplish their dreams. But really focusing on storytelling and getting these messages out to a wider audience is something that's really, really important to me for the future. So that's what's keeping me up most nights. And content, never. We're good for now, especially with the pandemic. But I'll always dream. I'll always dream.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's always travel. I mean, it helps scratch the itch, and sometimes I think it's a bit even better in the sense that you don't have to deal with all the headache that comes with, really long term travel or just living somewhere long term, and you get to really savor it. I mean, when you do city after city after city, it starts to blur. But if you have your like handful of 1 2 week trips or whatever you can do, especially with the U.S. vacation policy. But whatever you can do, I think, and take away from it, then I think you can kind of squeeze even more joy out of it as well. So there's different
Yeah.
paths. It doesn't have to be, as we've heard in your story, there's different paths, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why building a viable business is what's most important to me now, where I can decide my own vacation. Because the greatest thing for me about living in
Right.
America is the fact that I don't need a visa. Best thing is to not need a visa. I've never had that before, so it's wonderful to not rely on a visa. But the most heartbreaking thing is the 2 weeks or 3 weeks vacation. So
Yes.
that's the goal is to build a business that I don't need to take a vacation from, and I can turn on and turn off as need be.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. And I have very similar dreams. So excited to see that happen for you and hope that your good
Yeah.
fortune, focuses on me as well.
Yes, yes, to all of us.
To all of us, exactly. In closing, I'd like to make sure that our listeners know where they can find out more about you. So if there's a good website that we can send them to or social media, be happy to, have you share that now and of course put it in our show notes.
Yeah, for sure. So my website is my name, so www.jessicadrucker.com. On Instagram, I'm at Jessica V. Drucker, V as in Valentine, which is my middle name, so you don't forget. Jessica V. Drucker on Instagram. And also, I'd love if you're inspired and you want to buy the book, it's on Amazon. You can get it in paperback or ebook form, How to Move Abroad and Why It's the Best Thing You'll Do. And yeah, I'd love for people to head over to listen to Adventure Calls. It's my baby. And it's also the way that you can probably get to know me and my stories the best. So I do one interview with an expat, and then I create sort of an immersive story beforehand so you get to know the city that they live in. And I do the interview with them. And then every other podcast is a recall where I tell a story from my own travels. So you can get to know a little bit more about me there.
Awesome. Well, I've checked out plenty of the episodes, love the stories, both of the expats as well as your own recalls. So definitely recommend that to the listeners here. And again, we'll put all those links in the show notes. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Jess. It's amazing to hear your story and all of its different, pieces and parts and how you've created really a life abroad, even as you brought that back to the United States. So thank you for sharing and look forward to hearing about what's coming up for you in the next months and years.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for letting me indulge in my storytelling.
My pleasure. Hey guys, don't forget to like our video, subscribe to our channel, and leave your comment below. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Expat Empire. We help people to move abroad through our personalized consulting services. For more information, check out expatempire.com. Thanks and see you soon.